Showtime. Welcome to the show. I'm Brent Holland. Welcome, one and all. Get in your most comfy chair, get the coffee going, get a tea going, get a beverage of choice. Tonight is your night to snuggle in your most comfy chair. Got a great guest for you tonight. Paul Blow holds an MBA from, of all places, my old alma mater, and that's McGill University in Montreal. And he owns Blow Marketing Communications. Paul is also in his 18th year. There's a medal for that because he's a teacher. Imagine being 18 years as a teacher in today's generation. Aha. Paul has a new book out called The JFK Assassination Chokeholds. It's also co-authored by Oliver Stone, who is a collaborator, Jim DiEugenio, who fans of this show will know him very, very well, who wrote JFK Revisited, and two attorneys, Matt Crumpton and Andrew Eiler. Attorney Mark Adamski. I hope I have that right. You can help me out there, Paul.
Adamczyk, who's the
Okay.
third attorney co-author. So we're five
Right.
co-authors. Just to correct one
Please.
little thing is Oliver Stone plugged the book, but
Okay.
he didn't participate in the writing of the book. So
Okay.
we have
That
a nice
clarifies that.
message from him on the front cover.
Very nice. Okay. Now, the book, The JFK Assassination Chokeholds, brings forth the evidence supported by 10 points that prove by clear and convincing evidence that Oswald could not have acted alone. First off, I'd like to welcome Paul Blow, all the way from Quebec City.
Correct, Brent. Thank you.
Salut, mon ami, ça va aujourd'hui?
Bonjour, Brent. En français est excellent. It
Ici,
shows
c'est
that you have
bien.
some Montreal experience in you. And
Thank
as
you.
you know, McGill, right, it was a nice
Yeah,
bilingual area in Montreal. Wonderful experience there too for you, I guess.
very much so. Thank you. And yourself as well. Now, I have a very important question to ask you because you are from Quebec City and
Yeah.
you did attend McGill University. What's going on with the Habs?
Did you see the game today? Oh, well,
Oy vey, don't tell me I've recorded it and perhaps maybe now I don't need to go and watch it. Not good, eh? Not good.
I think there's a conspiracy, and the CIA don't want them to win.
You may be right
I
on
don't know why. I don't know
that.
why.
Oh boy, not the Habs of the 70s, are they? And that's the
No,
era I grew
no,
up with.
no.
Okay,
They have
Paul.
a young team. I think they'll turn it around at one point, but lots of ups and downs.
C'est pas. J'espère. Okay, let's talk about your book, The Assassination Chokeholds, JFK Assassination Chokeholds. Now, you say there's 10 key points. One of those points is the single bullet theory.
Yeah.
Now, this is a theory that we've been through several times before, and this is something that the Warren Commission was forced to come up with to explain four shots, but only three shells. Can you dive into that for us and unpack it?
Yeah, so I mean, the Zapruder film for your audience is named after a dressmaker called Zapruder, who is one of three people who caught the film or filmed the actual assassination. The Zapruder film is the clearest one, and it acts as a time clock, right? Because you can see with the injuries per number of slides that goes through, you're able to time. It's a time clock at the same time for the assassination. And the problem with Oswald was he had a Mannlicher Carcano, which is a bolt action rifle, and you could only get a shot away if you were really fast every 2.5 seconds. So that in itself is a problem, Brent, as you know, because most of the witnesses even heard two shots, one on top of one another, like bang, bang, so it doesn't even give time to reload, aim, and everything. And there was a faulty scope on the Mannlicher Carcano. And for anybody who's fired a rifle, I've fired some. My grandfather is one of the best shots in Canada, and he showed me how to fire a rifle in shooting ranges. And I fired a bolt action rifle, and a scope will slow you down. it will slow you down because you have to regain your target. So what they had is this guy, Oswald, who was, by all accounts, a poor shot and who was out of practice over and above that. Because this is something I found, and I'll get back to the magic bullet, but you know that when he was in Russia, the Russians evaluated him as a
No, I
shot.
didn't know that.
They did, and they said he was a poor shot. And that is an official file, and not at a shooting range. Over and above being a poor hunter, they were saying he was a poor hunter in Russia. He was a poor shot. And we know that in the Marines, he was evaluated twice. One, I mean, he clearly made the lowest grade, barely made the lowest grade the last time he was evaluated. And people were trying to say, oh, yeah, there was poor weather that day. But Jim Garrison checked the weather on the day that he was evaluated, and there was no problem with the weather. His, the Marines that saw him shoot described him also as a poor shot. But whether he was poor or not, for him, the problem was the amount of damage he would have caused with 3 shots. So initially, the FBI said in their report that 2 shots had caused the injuries to Kennedy, and 1 shot caused the injuries to Governor Connolly, who was seated in front of Kennedy. And the problem with that is that the FBI didn't want to take into account a non-looker called James Stagg, who was also struck by debris of a bullet. So that used up one of the shots. So now what you had is 2 shots, one that caused an exploding head wound that sent Kennedy's head violently backwards, which is another problem, right? Because that would suggest the shot came from the front and Oswald's from behind. So now what you have is 7 injuries, 2 to Kennedy and 5 to Connolly, that you have to explain with the 1 remaining bullet, because 1 caused the Teague injury, 1 caused Kennedy's head wound, and now you have a bullet that would have gone through the back, through Kennedy's throat, and they would have to explain that bullet as one going through Connolly at 5 different spots, because it enters Connolly sort of behind the armpit and comes out just in front, according to the Warren Commission or the single bullet theory, goes through his wrist on this side. And now, by the way, that bullet that went through his back breaks a rib. And then it breaks Connolly's one of the largest bones in the body, Kennedy's wrist bone. And it ends up somehow making its way into Connolly's thigh, okay, and causes more injury there. So let me begin with the trajectory problem is just crazy, because the back wound is below the throat wound where the bullet would have come up. Now, at Parkland, because Kennedy survived his injuries for some 30 minutes, he was still alive. 3 doctors worked on Kennedy and saw the throat wound, and they say, hey, no, that's an entry wound, right? There was Perry, Clark, and Carrico. They say that's an entry wound. It's so small. Okay, and they're used to handling bullet wounds in Dallas. It was you had that type of wound all the time at Parkland. Then the doctors at Parkland also say, hey, you know what? There's an exit wound in the back of Kennedy's head, the size of an egg. But getting back to the single bullet would have entered, and then the trajectory has it going up, but it has to come down again now because it makes its way eventually into Connolly's thigh. So it's going left to right, and it's going also up and down. The next problem you have with that bullet is Connolly himself is adamant, and you can see in the film that he reacts after Kennedy's holding his throat. And Connolly says, no, I wasn't struck by that bullet. He was struck before me. So that's that Connolly is adamant, and Connolly's wife is adamant about that. So you have a problem there. The third problem you have is that the bullet's intact. And the FBI, sorry, it's the FBI
FBI.
itself had conducted their own tests. They shot bullets through 50 cadavers. And I think the guy heading the experiment was a guy called Dulce. And he says, look, every time a bullet came out that touched a cadaver's wrist, it mushroomed. It was really damaged. Exactly. And instead of doing anything about that, the Warren Commission and the FBI suppressed that experiment. So then the next thing I'll say is even the three pathologists who performed the autopsy,
Mm.
Jones, Boswell, and Fink, as well as the two doctors that treated Connolly, they said, no, there's no way that bullet caused the damage to the injuries to Connolly. And there's sufficient amount of metallic debris removed from Connolly's wrist, still in his body. You know, they said that there's more debris in his body and that we've collected that is found missing from the single bullet.
Yeah.
I mean, those are just like even Hoover did not ever want to admit to the single bullet theory. So Arlen Specter, who was one of the lawyers that was on the Warren Commission, came up with this theory. And you can see, by the way, in his experiments, if you look at pictures where he puts the chalk on Kennedy's, like when he's reenacting it, the chalk is too low, like it's just too low. So he's trying the experiment with the chalk at a certain, but it's not working. So what happens next? Gerald Ford describes the wound as being at the bottom of Kennedy's neck. In other words, it was no longer in the back. They moved it up. So look, it's always been a terrible theory. It never worked. Now, in its defense, people would say, well, if it didn't do that, right? If it didn't go through, where's the bullet? Where's the bullet if it went in the other way? But, you have all sorts of testimony of other bullets because even Landis now is saying, hey, there was a bullet that I found in the back, whether
Mhm.
you believe him or not. The guy who replaced Berkeley at Bethesda, another White House physician, said that the aides he sent down to clean up the limousine found a bullet. So look, it just doesn't work. So that is one of the 10 areas we look in, and it's called the magic bullet. Is just not feasible. It never was, and it never will be. There's so many problems with it.
Absolutely. And, Cyril Wecht was on the show, and of course, he's adamant that the single bullet theory could not have happened the way the Warren report describes it. And
Yeah.
folks, just to wrap up with this, Kennedy's sitting in the back seat. Let's say this is his head. The bullet comes down, and they did a reenactment on this on the Discovery Channel. And then the bullet comes out his chest, not his neck. So what they did was, if the magic bullet comes down and comes out his chest, then it's got to come back up again and go into Connolly. So the physics just don't match. And once again, you're quite right. They found the bullet that they claimed did all this damage to both President Kennedy, two wounds in him, an entrance wound, and they claim an exit wound in the throat, and five wounds in Connolly, including breaking this huge rib and a wrist bone. And they've got the bullet, and the bullet is pristine. It looks like it was shot as a test bullet through cotton wadding. And as Paul reiterated, there are more morsos of this bullet still in Connolly than there is missing from the bullet. So obviously there is at least two shots. And Connolly himself said the bullet that hit Kennedy was a different bullet than hit me. And Mrs. Connolly, sitting right beside him, said the same thing.
And Brent,
So
if I may add,
sure,
there
please
were
do.
three commissioners out of the seven who dissented
That's
on the
right.
single bullet, and those were Commissioners Russell, Boggs, and Cooper. They dissented, and it's even written in the Warren Commission report that not everybody believes in the single bullet, but everybody thinks Oswald did it, But if you don't buy the single bullet, you cannot explain the injuries that took place to the onlooker,
Yeah.
to Kennedy and Connolly. So there had to be other shooters.
J'ai d'accord avec toi, mon ami. Oswald had many intelligence links. Can we unpack that one now, too?
Sure. As you know, the Warren Commission, Brent, described what? Oswald and Ruby as loners. Loners, disgruntled, couldn't fit in and so on and so forth. But the more you looked at Oswald, the more you saw, and remember that there was a total of six inquiries, right? And
Mhm.
investigations in the Kennedy assassination, five of them federal, one of them for the state of Louisiana, the Garrison one.
Mhm.
And I'm going to refer to the Church Committee. The Church Committee had two senators overseeing a subcommittee that looked into how the intelligence organizations did their job for the Warren Commission for the Kennedy assassination. So one famous senator, Richard Schweiker, right? He is on the record. You can hear this. If your audience were to follow the links around Richard Schweiker on YouTube, they could hear him clearly stating that everywhere you look with Oswald, you see the fingerprints of intelligence. I mean, when you think of how high up a person this is, right? For him to say something that damning and that blistering, you have to take it seriously. And he's not the only one who said that. So let me give you sort of a complicated one, but I'll try and make it simple. For your audience, he's the most amazing 24-year-old, I think,
Mm.
that ever passed away. He had just turned 24 when he got assassinated himself 2 days after the assassination, very suspiciously by Jack Ruby. But when you think that at the age, I think it was 19, that he went to Russia as a attempting to defect. I mean, for all practical purposes, he's not only a defector, but he's a defector who's promising or threatening to give away military secrets. These wouldn't have been just, simple or inoffensive military secrets, because Oswald, during his military career, was stationed on an island in Japan in a place called Utsugi, and that place was a spy plane base for the U-2 flights. The U-2 at the time was causing the Soviets fits because it could fly at such a high altitude and it could fly over Russia and China and take pictures. It was the best source of intelligence the Americans had at the time because they couldn't infiltrate Russia very well the way the Russians could get into Western countries. So anyway, Oswald worked as a radar operator on that base. So he had information about altitudes and codes and so on and so forth. So he goes to Russia and he threatens to give away secrets. Now, here's the thing. Most people who look into that think that that was more of a mission than a guy wanting to defect. In other words, he was a false defector, and there were at least a dozen false defectors in that time period. Okay. So what gave it away is a woman called Betsy Wolfe, who was an investigator for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, tried to find out how does the filing system work for the CIA, and what did the CIA files reveal about Oswald. So the first thing that was not normal is they didn't open immediately a 201 file. A 201 file is the most basic file. I mean, if Brent or I would, do something weird and talk to a Russian or they find something or go to Russia of all things, the first thing
Do a
you do is,
JFK assassination show.
yeah, you'd open a 201 file, right? So a 201 file, you'd put in the pictures and articles and things of that nature. They don't open one. The second thing that they found out is normally his file should have gone immediately to the Soviet Russia division. Okay, that would be the division that spies on Russia, but it didn't. Okay, it went to the Office of Security. And what John Newman, the great researcher himself, discovered and found out by looking into this is Oswald was most likely a marked card. In other words, they set him there, in there, and The Russians at one point would ask, because the Americans suspected that there was a Russian mole in the US, okay? And an important mole who gave away one of their moles, a guy called Popov. But anyway,
Mhm.
the point is Angleton, James Jesus Angleton became paranoid and wanted to know where and who was the mole in the US. So they set up this maneuver around Oswald called a mark card. In other words, if he didn't have a 201 file, the people trying to find out about him, right, and knocking on doors and asking questions, the analysis or the judgment would have been that the Russians are asking their mole to find out more about this character. So that is the fact that it bypassed the Soviet Russia division and it went into the Office of Security. All the information about Oswald is what, many people said, hey, wait, this isn't a normal defection. Okay. He is being used as a dangle. And he's a good dangle, right?
Perfect
He's a
angle.
he's a perfect angle because okay, he might be a bit, like he's not James Bond, but he worked as a radar operator for the U-2. That's going to get the Russians' attention for sure. So that's one thing that really had people, thinking that, wait a minute, this guy, he's not a normal defector. But the weird thing now is that this trader, when it comes time 2 years later to come back to the US, instead of being thrown in jail, he's given aid. He's married a Russian. They've had a kid, a baby in Russia, and he's given aid in the form of a consultant, someone to receive him at the port, who himself is a guy with intelligence ties, and he gets financial aid to come back. He should have been thrown in jail.
Absolutely,
And
as a
then they
trader.
say we didn't even debrief him. We did not debrief this guy who was in there for 2 years. So there's nothing that makes any sense. Now, flash forward, what does he do when he comes to the US? He goes down to Texas, and then out of nowhere, he says, I'm going down to New Orleans and I'm going to open a Fair Play for Cuba committee chapter in New Orleans about the worst city you could possibly do something. I mean, that would be like opening Brent the Fair Play for Al Qaeda after 9/11 in New York. That to me is because New Orleans,
Suicidal.
yeah, well, New Orleans so
Talk about a
dependent
spotlight.
on, yeah, and they're dependent on, trade with Central America. They're
Yep.
getting their coffee, they're getting their fruit, they're getting, and they cannot stand Castro because he's disrupting all the supply lines. So the giveaway here is that Oswald at one point gets caught in a scuffle because he's distributing these flyers, and a guy called Carlos Bringuier, a Cuban exile, comes up to him. They get into a scuffle, and they're arrested. And what does Oswald do when he's arrested? He calls the FBI, and the FBI sends someone, and he spends an hour and a half to 3 hours with him. What do you think? Complaining about how he was roughed up? No. Most likely, Oswald was an informant. And he was informing on two types of people, Cuban exiles who may have wanted to show communist sympathies because if they signed up, he'd have them. But at the same time, the FBI was clamping down on anti-Castro Cubans that were involved in all these, sabotage missions because things were so sensitive right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? That Kennedy wanted to calm things down. And he said, look, we can't invade, we can't attack. We've just gotten out of this nuclear holocaust possibility. So this operation called Mongoose that was going on, where they were, they were the Cuban exiles who were doing all sorts of raids on Cuba and on their sugarcane fields. And they wanted that to stop and to lower the pressure. So the suspicion there is that Oswald was spying on both groups. And that's why he called the FBI. And the final thing that was really weird with his New Orleans, I mean, it's not the final thing. There's many things weird. We didn't even get into Mexico City and all that. But in New Orleans, where does he set up shop? Right? He sets it up. One of the flyers, there's a mistake he makes. It's marked 544 Cap Street. Now, anybody who would go to that address, they would say, wait a minute. The building itself is full of right-wing fanatics, including Cuban exiles. His actual office was used by the Cuban Revolutionary Council at shortly before he went in there. And then all the buildings beside are what? It's the Office of Naval Intelligence, the FBI, the CIA. So as
The
Garrison,
perfect
right?
place for an anti-communist to set up shop, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So look, those are just a few, but we have about five or other six other points that,
Yeah.
show, conclusively that this guy wasn't just a loner that was drifting left and right. No, he was a pawn being used by intelligence for all sorts of roles that you wouldn't give to a James Bond there. So yeah, this is a key thing. One of the high up persons, an officer called Kent, who was actually really involved with the DRE. The DRE was that Cuban exile group
Yeah.
in
Bunch
New
of students.
Orleans that
Yeah.
was headed by Carlos Bringuier, the guy who
Yeah.
fought with Oswald.
Oswald in New
So
Orleans.
this guy Kent told his daughter. His daughter asked, "What was Oswald?" He says, "A useful idiot."
Yeah.
Is his answer.
Yeah.
If you want to stay abreast of all the best news right now, uh, if you go to jfkchokeholds.com, okay, for your audience, you'll find out about the authors, you'll find out about the book, and you'll be able to follow us on X or Facebook, okay? And there's a lot of breaking news taking place right now around the book and around JFK related activities. We'll even plug this show, for instance, we'll plug it on X. So that would be my recommendation if you want to know more about the authors and the book.
And I'll put that up as well, folks. I'm Brent Holland from The Brent Holland Show. Take care of each other out there. See you next time.